Hello, everyone, and welcome to Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their advice. If you'd like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. I facilitate a monthly animation group because I found over the last 8 years in coaching autistic folks that there were so many that were passionate about the world of animation. That's why today I'm thrilled to be joined by Jeff Snyder to talk about the many presentations he gives relating to autistic people and animation. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us on Autism Stories today.
Thank you.
I wanted to start out and learn, where does your story in the autism community begin?
Well, I was first diagnosed with autism at 21 months old. I didn't start speaking, I was nonverbal until I was 4 years old. And then I had been, upon my graduation from high school in 2007, I became the first student with autism in my hometown's school district to have gone through pre-K through grade 12 without coming from other towns and other school districts. And then I also moved into my own apartment in 2015, and I've been here ever since. So my objective is to share my story with the autism community and hopefully inspire others to do the same.
Now, through my organization, Autism Personal Coach, we formed an animation group because many of the people that we coach have a passion for animation. I know you love animation as well, so I was wondering, why do you think animation is something that many autistics are drawn towards?
Well, in the sense, I think animation is sort of like a gateway to a different kind of reality, if you will, because people with because autistics they sometimes get bogged down by the reality of the world that we live in, and they want to go into their own little world. And I think animation, it's not only a visual representation, but it's also like a internal representation of what people with autism want to be as they get old, as they live their lives, if you will.
I've heard from autistic folks that their love of animation has allowed them to learn and become more aware socially. Would you say that is true in any way for you?
I would say yes, because I think as someone who grew up watching Disney films, I've come to view animation as, particularly Disney, as kind of like, characters that we can identify with on the autism spectrum, and that's the purpose of autism and Disney, of the Autism and Disney character series, where I take certain characters and that display traits of autism, and I share those ideas with the community, with the audience, and hopefully each character will spark a response in people that says, "Oh, this is why so and so acts the way they are. They're like, dopey, or they are like Gus, or they don't understand social boundaries like Tigger, and who can also be really curious like Alice." That's where the goal of this presentation, of this series, comes into play here. And with each character that I discuss, each character connects with the audience in a way possible. So that's where that's the whole meat of this particular presentation.
Now, talking about Disney, you've given presentations regarding autism in Disney characters. Some
Yes.
people, believe that Winnie the Pooh is autistic. Would you agree with them in this notion?
Well, I would definitely agree with those that say Winnie the Pooh's autistic because, as a matter of fact, Pooh is actually in volume one of my Autism and Disney character series, and and Pooh represents that people, autistic people, for example, they have a limited diet. Like all Pooh eats is honey, and certain certain people on the autism spectrum have a will have a tendency to eat a restricted diet. That's where that's an example. And another thing that a lot of people can connect with Pooh on the autism spectrum is that he can believe everything that a person says, or he can believe anything that is said. Because if you have seen any of the Winnie the Pooh films in like the '90s, or even the New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh in the late '80s, early '90s, you'll notice that there are certain times where Pooh will hear something and he'll tend to believe he'll tend to believe that certain thing exists. Like, for example, in the Pooh's Grand Adventure: The Search for Christopher Robin, he believes that Christopher Robin has been kidnapped by a creature called the Skull, when in reality he's really gone to school.
And thinking about some other Disney characters that might be autistic or have traits of autism, that are there some that most people would be surprised to learn about?
Well, I think a few examples of characters that I think people might be surprised is I would say probably the Mad Hatter and the March Hare from Alice in Wonderland, because they create their own like holiday, which is the unbirthdays, and the unbirth and people with autism will tend to create their own holidays, and they try to engage others to join in. But the people that don't understand may not want to take part, and they kind of don't understand. So that's an example right there, because if you notice, and these two are actually going to be included in volume 2 of my series, and they actually go the White Rabbit into joining them by obviously destroying his watch when they believe that it's not working properly. So that's a good example of that's a good example, because when they destroy the watch, they're really trying to engage the White Rabbit into joining their shenanigans, and obviously the White Rabbit doesn't want to, and ends up paying the price with his watch being destroyed.
Your presentation regarding autism in Disney characters sounds like such a fun and interesting, conversation or presentation to me. What's been the feedback you've received regarding this presentation?
So far, feedback's been really positive. I mean, I mostly have presented this virtually, but I actually managed to present this in front of a live audience last month in Orlando, at a convention called MyCon, and the reviews from MyCon were pretty favorable, and allows them to and it gave the audience a chance to engage which particular character they connect to the most.
I know you do lots of speaking engagements, over the last year or so. I would imagine more of those are through Zoom than in-person engagements. Do you have a preference to one versus the other?
Well, I will say, personally, I would prefer in person over Zoom, because when it comes to Zoom, even though it can be very convenient, you don't get a lot of that interaction that you get in person. If there's one thing that the pandemic has taught us, is that we don't always have to be in person, or we can always be talking from the comfort of our own homes. But from a professional standpoint, I would prefer in person, because get to, take pictures with people, you get to talk to them, you get, to, do all these things that you can't do on Zoom. So,
Other than the autism in Disney characters presentations, what are some of the other topics that you talk about?
well, one of the other, another presentation that I've created is called Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Why does it represent neurodiversity? And I'm pretty sure a lot of people notice that Rudolph, you know, is sort of a representation of neurodiversity because Rudolph, Hermie, and the Misfit Toys, who are the characters that I talk about in this presentation, each display a representation of neurodiversity in the sense that, like, Rudolph wants to be accepted and despite having a red nose, and Hermie wants to be a dentist, but because he's an elf, they believe he's relegated to just making toys. And the Misfit Toys are each have their own goal, but because for example, like they have a handicap, if you will, they're rejected by society, and they're cast to live on this island of Misfit Toys. So.
And if anyone listening is interested in booking you for a speaking engagement, how can they go about doing so?
Well, I am on I have a profile on Speaker Hub. Um, People can also reach me. I run a page on Facebook called Jeff Snyder Disability Self Advocate, and a group called Jeff Snyder Disability Self Advocacy, which has around 600 members as of this interview. And also they can reach me through my email at twilightsparkle3562@gmail.com. And also I am on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.
What's been your experience with Speaker Hub in getting, speaking engagements?
Well, so far I have gotten a few. I've gotten one speaking engagement through them, and I actually have another that I'm working towards for the end of the month. And then, of course, I've also gotten speaking engagements through my LinkedIn profile as well. As a matter of fact, there was a company that reached out to me in North Carolina called PPD, and they have expressed interest in having me present to talk about my experience to their people. So, that's where that's where, if anyone wants me to speak, whether it be in person or Zoom, they can reach out to me through those platforms.
So, other than the presentations you give, you have worked at a grocery store for many years. For many autistics, the grocery store can be one of the most overwhelming places to go to. What's been your experience working at the grocery store?
Well, it's not the most perfect job out there. I started out as a bagger, and now I'm a porter or janitorial specialist. And I will say, the one thing I view from working in a grocery store is that you don't consider working in a grocery store as your primary career. I get that, some people might be happy working in a grocery store, but there are going to be some obstacles when it comes to working. Particularly, grocery stores tend to be sensory overloading and anxiety provoking. So I would probably recommend that there would be ways to teach someone who is working in a grocery store or wants to work in a grocery store sort of like tips and coping techniques that can help the individual work at the grocery store. So one tactic is I usually go in an hour early to kind of mentally prepare myself for the work shift ahead. And, I listen to my iPod and stuff like that. So that's one tactic that I would recommend.
Now, for those that the grocery store is overwhelming, are there accommodations people can ask for from the grocery store itself to reduce their stress levels and still get the groceries that they need?
Well, I would probably recommend maybe reaching out to the grocery store and say, is there a certain quiet time during the day where I can come in and do my grocery shopping, or can I work during these hours, et cetera, et cetera. And some grocery stores will be accommodating, but there has to be kind of a give and take. So give and take, given some circumstances. So that's one thing I will recommend, is that you will need to kind of be open-minded and flexible when it comes to getting specific accommodations, because there may be some times where you need to work this certain amount, or you need to do this. So be prepared kind of for what is so be prepared to kind of give and take, if you will.
Well, Jeff, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much. And I know this was a long time coming, mostly on my end, and I apologize for that. But I do appreciate your patience.
Thank you. And I'm also one other thing before we close up is that I contributed to a book called "This Is Autism" by Jessica Leitchwise and Aidan Allman Cooper. It is on Amazon.com for $19.97. For those of you that don't know, myself and about 11 other people with autism contributed to this book, and we kind of talk about our lives of living on the spectrum.
Well, I'll make sure to share a link for that in the podcast description for this episode.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
No problem, Doug.
Thanks so much to Jeff for the conversation. To learn more about Jeff and book him for an upcoming presentation, check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. If you're interested in how Autism Personal Coach can help you beyond this podcast, you can find a link to book a free call to learn how we can help coach you to reduce your daily overwhelm and get the things that you need or want in your life. So book a 45-minute Zoom call with me today. If you'd like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also really appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On next week's episode of Autism Stories, we will have a conversation about autistic research. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.